Hi, and welcome. Today we're going to be discussing the Atomic Pi, what it is, what it isn't, how it compares to the Raspberry Pi, what kind of current draw it had, what temps it saw, what kind of FPS you might see, and which OS is going to be the best for you to run. So starting off, let's talk about what options are there for the Atomic Pi. So let's talk about the different options you may have when purchasing your Atomic Pi. The first one being the $35 option that everybody's been talking about and how it matches the same price as the Raspberry Pi. So for $35, what do you get? You get an Atomic Pi. Granted, this may not have an easy way to power it like the Raspberry Pi's micro USB, and that you have to plug in 2 wires. Big deal. The development board. That's what you're getting into. It does not come with a power supply, but what it does come with is 16 gigabytes of onboard storage. The Raspberry Pi comes with 0. You actually have to purchase an additional memory card for the Raspberry Pi. I think that's great. $35, this is an amazing deal. What other options do you have? You have the option to purchase an Atomic Pi with the small board. The small board essentially takes the bottom plug and puts a diode and an LED in a barrel jack. So what that does for you is it gives you a barrel jack, which if you purchase a power supply, it's most likely going to have a barrel jack as well. Makes it so that it's just plug and play. The LED is an indicator, and the diode helps with the reverse polarity. The small board plugs into the bottom of the Atomic Pi. Kind of got an awkward shape. It makes the board larger in pretty much every dimension, and it makes it even sit further at an angle so that it's kind of on a downward slope, which is fine. It just looks kind of funny. The next option is what they call the whole enchilada. So you get an Atomic Pi and you get the large board, and this comes in at a price of $49 as of right now. It comes pre-assembled, does not come with this barrel jack. So the main difference between this board and the small board is that it's quite large. It's actually significantly larger than the whole board, the whole Atomic Pi. It has a slot opening where you can solder in an Arduino Nano, and there's a prototyping area with power and ground pins. All of the wiring has now come into screw terminals, as well as power is a screw terminal as well. It did not come with a barrel jack. You will need to purchase a separate one if you want to have plug and play with a normal barrel jack power supply. It introduces another USB port by filling in the camera port. The next option, which is what I went with, was the dev kit. The dev kit at the time of my purchase was $95 plus shipping and handling. It was an amazing deal at $95. You get 3 of these antennas. These antennas, you need about 3 per Atomic Pi, so you only get 1 set for 1 Pi. You get 1 power supply at 5.15 volts at 2.5 amps. You get a second Atomic Pi with a small board. You get 2 cameras, all for the price of what was $95. Has now increased to $119 as of this video, and I have a feeling it's going to keep increasing. It has gone up 3 times since I purchased this board, and it just keeps selling out. So I think that they're seeing that the full dev kit is quite a steal. At $119, it is a one that you have to think about, I think. If you want the cheapest option possible, $35, wiring everything in yourself, is actually a pretty good deal. Yes, you will need to purchase adapters to be able to make it much easier for you to wire things. Otherwise, you are going to struggle with these tiny little pins and bending them. That's why I do suggest, if you do plan on doing that, forget the small board. It's not worth it at that point because you'll end up spending more money than just getting the whole enchilada. And once you spend $50, you're also going to need to buy a power supply, right? And maybe you do want a camera. And you want some wireless, so you want some better antenna reception. Once you start factoring all this in, add it all up and see, is it worth it to get the dev kit? Maybe you end up spending the same amount of money and you would get the dev kit anyways and end up with a free Pi. If that's the case, then it's still worth it to get the dev kit. The last option is to get 24 Atomic Pis at a discounted rate of $696. If you're a distributor and you want to distribute out Atomic Pis, or you just want to get a cluster of Pis, then go for it. Getting into the size, weight, and dimensions of these boards gets a little funny. I have the Raspberry Pi Zero, the Raspberry Pi 3. Looking at the Atomic board, the whole enchilada, just look at the size difference between it and the Raspberry Pi Zero, as well as it and the Raspberry Pi 3. I mean, these things are just significantly different in size. And I'm going to post up on the screen the difference in the size, weight, and dimensions. And as you can see, the weight going from 12 grams with the Raspberry Pi Zero to the 381 grams of the whole enchilada is just such a huge difference. It's just hilarious. The fact that the camera is larger than the Raspberry Pi Zero goes to show that these two boards have two completely different purposes. And we'll get a little bit more into that later on. One thing that the Raspberry Pi, especially the Raspberry Pi 3, has going for it over the Atomic Pi is just more onboard ports. And that may not be an issue if you don't mind having a USB 3.0 hub, because this does have USB 3.0 on the Atomic Pi, on even just the normal Pi without the whole enchilada. What makes that important is, yes, it does give you the ability to put a hub on there, but you're going to be spending more money. And I think that's kind of the theme with this Atomic Pi. You can get the $35 Pi. You can get the power supply, and you'll end up actually cheaper because you don't have to buy a memory card than the Raspberry Pi. But you're not going to get all the potential out of that Atomic Pi that you would if you start spending all this money. And that's, like I said, that's kind of the story with this. Is this thing almost turns into a little bit of a gaming PC, and you just start spending more and more. I need another SSD. I need another video card, sound card. I need all this stuff for it, and you keep adding all these options to it, and now your computer's got spinners on it and a lowering kit, and you're got a 10-inch subwoofer. So this thing is fully customizable for the good and bad that you may see in that. So I did try quite a few different OSs with the Atomic Pi, both the whole enchilada as well as the small board. And I did come across an issue with pretty much every single OS, and I think it's a driver issue with this board, and that is when plugged into a 4K monitor, it does work, but it has memory issues. I think that the way the GPU has its memory shared between the RAM will fill up, and it fills up in a way that it doesn't know how to handle it. I did have a fix for it, but the ultimate fix was just dropping down to 1080p, and it was significantly smoother and overall just more fluid in running. So I tried their base OS first, which was pretty much based on a Ubuntu OS, kind of lightened down a little bit. It was pretty good. The fact that it comes on there pre-installed is, I think, absolutely amazing. You could throw a power supply on this thing and plug your monitor and keyboard, and you're immediately into playing with your Atomic Pi. But obviously, we're tinkerers and we want to try different things. So, I tried a different OS, the first one being Debian. I figured, well, Debian would be, a little more stable, maybe lighter, doesn't have as many features as Ubuntu. So, tried that out. It was pretty good. It seemed pretty snappy, and I was pretty happy with it overall. But one issue I did come across that I came across on the OS that came with it was no audio. HDMI audio just doesn't seem to work with Ubuntu or Debian. The next one I thought I would try, which would make it even faster, was Raspbian. Took the Raspberry Pi OS and put it on there. And by far the lightest OS I tested. Was pretty snappy as well. Not as snappy as I would have liked it to be for as light as it was. And it was quite enjoyable to use as well. Kind of made me feel at home with the Raspberry Pi, more comfortable with how the terminal worked there. The next one was Lubuntu. This was my favorite OS by far. It was far snappier than any of the other OSs, and it just overall had way better support. HDMI audio worked right out of the gate, and it just overall is very fluid, especially if you make sure you add a swap port partition of at least 1 gigabyte of swap. And there's a reason for that, and I'll get into that when we start talking about the gaming. It's quite important to make sure that you have this nice and stable system. I did come across one issue with Lubuntu, and that was shutting down. For some reason, there's a weird bug where every time I shut down, it kind of reboots and goes into this weird loop where it just says Lubuntu, like as if it's booting up, but it'll never actually boot up. And I just end up having to pull the plug on it. And then the last OS I tested was Windows 10. Windows 10 actually was not too bad. It's pretty snappy. It uses resources like crazy, even at idle, which really slows the potential down of what this board could do with Windows 10. If Windows could make a smaller version, I know they have a Windows IoT edition, but it only is available for 4 devices. One of those being the Raspberry Pi. But for this device, it's not something I would daily. It would be something that if you had some, Microsoft Visual Studio code that you wanted to run on this, you could install Windows, and maybe you don't daily it or really use it for any Windows purposes, but if you want to use it for, say, some custom application that you ran, and you want some GUIs going on that are just in the way you want with Windows, and you want it to be able to run on your home PC as well, it's great, and it will function and be able to do that. So let's get into some of the data that I got while testing these boards. I did test in essentially every single OS other than Windows 10, just because I ran out of time. By the time I got Windows 10 in, it was a little too late. I was trying to install it on an external hard drive, because I was doing some testing with speed differences between USB 3.0 hard drive and the internal storage, and Windows does not like to be installed on a portable hard drive, so I spent a lot of my time troubleshooting that. But getting into the details of the gaming aspect, I tried about 3 games. I tried a few more, but I kept running into an issue where it would just lock up, and that came down to the swap file. If I didn't have any swap file on it, I would end up filling up to 2 gigabytes of RAM, and the computer would just lock up. And so you'd have to hard pull the power and boot it back up and try again, and the same thing would happen. So that went away as soon as I added swap. And also the OS just seemed snappier at that point as well. And Ubuntu is just absolutely amazing. Once you fill up the RAM, how quickly it frees that RAM up compared to Ubuntu and Debian. So let's talk about these FPS numbers. They're, in my opinion, kind of funny. So Left 4 Dead 2 was most definitely the fastest. I was getting close to 30 FPS. Really, without any zombies around, I was over 30 FPS. It was once a horde would come in, it would drop me down to about 22 FPS, and so that really brought the numbers down. But this thing kicked its butt. I mean, it was probably running all 4 cores around 60% usage and just maxing out the GPU. None of these other games were doing that, yet for some reason they had lower FPS. It's kind of funny. Octodad being the next one, I thought it would run alright. And it did. It seemed to run about 30 FPS pretty consistently, except for certain situations that were a little bit harder and a lot of objects moving around, and it would drop down to about 22-ish, 21. But I would say pretty close to averaging around 28 FPS most of the time. Obviously it was 25, but those lows really pull it down. And I think that all that comes down to is the CPU load on it was really hitting it when you start adding all these objects moving around, these zombies moving around, different things like that. Hits the CPU pretty hard and just can't keep up with it. The next one was Trine. So I was pretty disappointed in Trine. It was, one, really slow to load up, and two, it just chugged along at like 8 FPS consistently. It didn't go up, didn't really go down, maybe by 1 to 2 FPS, but it was just chugging along. As far as our gaming testing has been done, I tried them on all different OSs except for Windows 10, and they were ran at a 1080p screen with 720p resolution for the game, and everything's set to low. So the next is our CPU temps. Using sensors for terminal, I was able to grab the CPU core temps, and I kind of chose the second to hottest core. They were all semi-close. 3 of them were. I had one core that seemed a little bit cooler than the other 2. Overall, very satisfied with the temps that I received. This passive heatsink would get hot but stay there, and I know with a cooling fan it would get significantly cooler temps, but honestly they're definitely not necessary. When gaming, Left 4 Dead 2 really cranked up the temperature on this. It pulled the most current, and it really was cranking up the temps. We saw about 61, 62 degrees on the second to hottest core, which in my opinion was fantastic for a passively cooled system. Idling was roughly around 33, 32 degrees, and this was as soon as I booted up. I let the CPU come down to about as low as 0% as possible, and ran sensors quite a few times just to get a little bit of an average. It didn't really seem to move much at all from the beginning to a couple minutes after, but it seemed around 32, 33 degrees for the second hottest CPU core. And this was all done around 22 degrees Celsius for room temperature. Continuing on with temperatures was the heatsink. I used a IR gun so that I could see what temps I was receiving on the heatsink, and with gaming we were sitting around 48, 49 degrees Celsius. Fantastic temperatures once again. Idling, I was actually kind of surprised about this. This was before any kind of gaming, just strictly idling for 10 minutes, and we were sitting around 39 degrees. Not bad, not great, but obviously once you're gaming it doesn't raise up that much more, so once again I'm okay with these numbers. And with it off, completely off, just sitting there, hasn't been used in over a day, it was sitting at 23 degrees Celsius. Now this is the interesting part. the amount of current draw that we had. So this was done with a keyboard, a wireless mouse module, and that's it plugged in. No external hard drive, no LEDs or anything additional plugged into this that you will eventually have. No camera, nothing like this. So this is just strictly the bare bones computer Atomic Pi current draw. Now mind you, they provide a 2.5 amp max power supply. I had a 4 amp power supply that I was using for these tests, as well as their 2.5 I tested as well, and I'll talk about some small differences there. But for this is in regards to the 4 amp power supply. When gaming for Left 4 Dead 2, we saw about 3.2 amps max, and in most situations it was hovering around 3 to 3.1 amps. For web office use, it was around 1.8 with peaks of about 2 amps, and then idling, it's right around 1.3 amps draw. So as you can see, the interesting part being over 3 amps for gaming. So they provide a 2.5 amp power supply. When I tested it with that, it seemed to max out at 3 amps, the power supply, so it was pulling more than it was rated for, which most power supplies will kind of do that, but they usually suffer at voltage drop. So it wasn't enough to kill the board or anything like that, but just not something I would recommend running all the time if you plan on hitting it hard like that, is the power supply that it comes with. I do recommend purchasing at the very minimum a 4 amp board for this, because once you start adding an external hard drive to this, there's another half an amp. You add a couple projects with maybe an Arduino and different things powering it, there's another half an amp. And pretty soon you're going to be pulling well over 4 amps, or at least 4 amps if you are in a worst case scenario. And you always want to provide enough power to be able to beat your worst case scenario. So, in conclusion, what is the Atomic Pi? Well, it's a developer board that is new, right? So with that you get some benefits. You get some more power compared to the Raspberry Pi, but what you don't get is you don't get the already proven projects that are already out there, the instructables that are already out there, the driver support that's already out there for just simple things like the GPIO pins. Getting the GPIO pins to work on this, I couldn't figure it out in the short amount of time that I had. I do plan on getting the LEDs working for this particular enchilada, but it just doesn't have the support that's out there by something that's been out on the market for as long as it has. And on top of that, these are 2 different devices, just like this is compared to an Arduino. An Arduino has a real-time clock with a microprocessor that runs at a significantly lower power draw than this. You're not really going to want to run this on battery for long time projects. An Arduino, yeah, you can, especially in ESP32 with deep sleep mode, when it's pulling in the microamps, and these are pulling in, 1 amp, 2 amps, maybe, and this is pulling in 3, 4 amps. You're just not going to be using the same boards for the same type of projects. This is going to be more GUI based, heavily website traffic with some USB hard drive transfer speeds, different things like that. That's what this is going to be great for. The other thing is this does have a real-time clock on it, so once GPIO support gets significantly better for this, and it's just going to take time. All this stuff takes years to build up to what this has become. And you just got to be aware of that. If you don't have either of these boards yet, to be perfectly honest, I would recommend a Raspberry Pi. At the very, very least, get a Raspberry Pi Zero. They're $10. And if you really want one of these, then get one of these as well. With that said, let me know if you guys want me to test something else out. I do have all kinds of equipment here. If there's something really specific you want to see. I mean, I have oscilloscopes, power supplies, multimeters, amp clamps. I got pretty much anything to test out. I have a 3D printer if you guys want to see different cases. Let me know and I can try and get around to it, and leave a like and hit subscribe if you want to see some more interesting stuff. I'm open to different ideas. I have projects such as an automated door lock that's using an ESP and just a battery. I have fully 3D printed motors. I have a 1-pound BattleBot, along with quite a few other projects. So if you guys are interested in me documenting these, or if you want to see a particular project, I am an electrical engineer, so I can go over electronic fundamentals. If that's of interest to you guys, let me know. And thanks for watching.